Alright, Shalom, all praises to Yahweh, Bahashem Yahushua, Bahashem Rakakadash. Double honors to the apostles and elders of Great Millstone. Salutation to all the brothers and a few sisters is out there. One to the Israelite foreigners from the seed of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Shalom in the Hebrew, which means peace. It's a quick show through the spirit of Yahweh, Bahashem Yahushua. Just having a conversation with a brother. And certain things that was said in the conversation kind of inspired this video. Inspired me to do this video because it's something I always think of, especially about today's environment. I mean, today's climate, the way things are being presented to us down here on Earth, and the way it got to where, the way things got to where it got, the reason why wickedness has exceedingly achieved its goal. Yes, we know Esau rules the world. We know Esau sets the standards, okay? But it deals with the parenting on the part of Jake. Now, I'm a little bit older than most. I'm just a little bit older. So, I grew up in the 80s. And in the 80s was a reflection of the people of the 70s. So when I was a kid in the 80s, I used to look at people that grew up in the 70s or the 60s. They were young at the time, but they was following their parents and their ways, okay? And their ways of their parents, the parents before them. So you always had the transitioning of generational differences or everybody try to keep a tradition of their parents. But as the time went by, as I was growing up as a young man, I noticed that people was kind of not following the ways of their fathers, all right? The generation prior to. Because the generation prior to, there wasn't perfect, not at all. There was not perfect at all. Hard-headed, hard to communicate, which in reality that was the best way to say less things and the things that you do say to be more effective instead of explaining yourself like a woman would. And you grew up in that generation where you felt that you wasn't getting the love that you were supposed to get because the world was teaching you that in order for somebody to love you, they have to say it, or pretty much they had to say it all the time and give you hugs and kisses, but that never really worked with Jake. Jake grew up tough. So the way we operate is in a tough manner, and we know that it worked because it worked for generational. But like I said, we was taught something different. So when you look at today's environment, so fast lock in, because I must talk about that time period. So that time period of the 1990s, like I always said, I was supposed to do a show on this a long time ago, but the spirit. So the 1990s came about, still the transitional period. A lot of Jakes had a lot of fun. You could hear people that were teenagers, they had a blast, and young people had blast, But it was a great shift that was being taken place. And that great shift came with a lot of wrongs. It came with a lot of freedoms, a lot of fun, but it led to what this abomination of society is today. Hypersexual driven, disrespectful, just complete rebellion. All right? This particular time was a complete rebellion, and that so happens where technology also changed. We had computers, but computers wasn't that fast until the late 90s. Everybody had ability to have computers, and TV was more accessible. Music was a greater influence and so forth, and all these things was happening right in the sight of everybody, and you could feel the great change. And when you being taught that changes are good, but not being taught that changes, when it comes to changes, depending on the change. All right. So it never got good. It just got worse. But real quick, Proverbs 19 and 18 says, "Chastise thy son while there is hope." So there was a time and period where you could chastise your children and lead them to the right direction. But what happens when you take the father out the household and let the mother and her emotions run it? The son becomes whatever the mother is, and the son is going to look for a father figure, and he's going to find it in the streets. So taking the father out the household was the greatest way of destroying family structure. But when the father's in the scene, he was supposed to do what? He was supposed to chastise him. It says, "And let not thy soul spare for his crying." So, like the scripture says, spare not the rod. When it comes to a son, even a daughter, you gotta be tough. So you have people out there that say, you know what, I'm not gonna do that. I'm gonna do the opposite because my parents' way was off. All right, their way was off, and what did that lead? That lead to a disaster. That is this society, man. Um, Proverbs 30. I love bringing this out because it's true. Proverbs 30 and 11. There is a generation that curseth their father and doeth not bless their mother. And that's exactly what I'm talking about. When you don't spare your children, when you attempt to be your child's best friend, or instead of being a father or a mother or a parent onto them, you allow them to get away with things. All right. Another thing too, around the 1990s, mid 90s, they was pushing the idea of not for parents not to discipline their children. And there's a lot of commercials, movies with scenes where a child's being disciplined by their parent. I forgot what movie it was. I remember the actress. I think it was Sidney Crawford was in there. She was in a scene. I forgot what movie it was. Salakia. I seen a lot of movies, but she was in the elevator scene with the guy that was supposed to be a hero, and the Spanish lady was beating up her child. She turned back and just punched her in the face. Like that was so righteous, you know? So what did I do? That allowed children to be like, oh, that's another thing too. Children were calling the state on their parents. They allow that to happen. So now, like I said, you have a generation that just purely curse out their fathers publicly. You had Benzino's daughter. She cursed out her father publicly. You've seen it several times. All right, rappers and so forth. It says there is a generation that are pure in their own eyes, and that's that generation because they they were spared. Okay, Apostle Torah had said it before. It says a strong man. Strong man make an easy life. A weak man makes a harder life. Something to that extent. I just said it too when I was telling the brother. But to that point, when the times were tough back then, back in the days, they made it easier for the generations later. But the generations that grew up from these soft times became weak. And since they became weak, they produce more weaklings. And they think they're pure in their right eye, in their own eyes. Like, oh, our way is right. Our way is the way. But your way never worked because your way is brand new. Well, it's not new, but is that rebellious spirit. It says, and yet not washed from their filthiness. There's a generation, oh, how lofty are their eyes, and their eyelids are lifted up. So this is that generation, man. Let me just look this up real quick. Get this. This is why the Lord is going to judge these people. It should be 1 Samuel's. Yeah, 1 Samuel's Samuel's talking to, wow. Samuel told Saul, yep, should be 12 then. First Samuel 15 and 23. For rebellion is as sin of witchcraft, and stubbornness is as iniquity and idolatry. Rebellion is a sin as witchcraft. Let's look up the word rebellion. It says Mariah, rebellion, rebellious, in contract. It says bitterness, that is rebellion, consecrately bitter, or rebellion bitter, most rebellious, rebellious. So rebellion, and what we was taught in the society, which, matter of fact, since I'm talking about this, Psalm 64. This is another one that comes to fruition. Psalm 64 and 6, I believe. They search out iniquities, talking about the elites. They search out iniquities and they accomplish a diligent search. And that iniquity, in order to break the cycle of tradition, you have to push in rebellion. You have to entice the people. You have to seduce the people. Bring out the worst of people. Bring out the animalistic behavior. This man has literally digitally searched how to get people. Another example, porn. Porn wasn't that accessible in the 80s unless you go to certain spots. Slacking. Unless you go to certain spots to get some porn or whatever. But in the 90s, especially with cable, and I hear we had the hot box. They probably happened nationwide. Porn was more easy accessible, but it got more easy accessible by the internet. All right, and that brings out your animalistic behavior. So this man searched out iniquities, and he knew how to placate people to move them in that rebellious state, which is that's witchcraft. And why you think you see witchcraft in a high level that it is right now? Okay, it says they accomplish a diligent search, both the inward thoughts of every one of them, and their heart is deep. And this is talking about the elites. All right. Matter of fact, Isaiah 29 and 15. It says, "Woe unto them that seek deep to hide their counsel from the Lord. For their works are in the dark, and they say, Who seeth us? Who knoweth us?" So these people led the way to have the people go off. And I'll get Isaiah 47. No, matter of fact, let me get Nahum 3 and 4. It says, "Because of the multitude of the whoredoms of the well-favored harlot, the mysteries of witchcraft that selleth the nations through her whoredoms, and families through her witchcraft." And that's what we have. We have a nation that's completely into witchcraft, because the nation was taught to do what? To rebel. And that's what we're seeing. We're seeing the same transitional effect that was taking place before the flood that's happening right now. This is why the Lord is going to destroy this place, because it's not history repeating. It's the same spirits doing the same thing. Matthew 24. I think it's 38. I could be wrong. 37. It says, "But as the days of Noah were, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. For as is in the days that were before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying, and giving into marriage, until the day that Noah entered into the ark, and knew not until the flood came and took them all away. So shall also the coming of the Son of Man be." And that's where we at, the perfect formula for the perfect time, for the perfect ending. Those that self-willed and do what been righteous in their own sight, they all going to be judged by Yahweh B'Shem Yahushua when that time comes. And that's what we see. And before, the ultimate judgment, the Lord is revealing a lot of things. Okay? So through through the Spirit, no one of your brothers edify. Something real quick. Shalom to the elect of the nation Israel. Shalom.